All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into the Sands of Time podcast. I am your host, Tarek Ibrahim, and I am with Mujir Muneeruddin. And Mujir, as always, when I'm reading online on the comment section, I stumble upon something that every person has heard about, everyone's very familiar with, is that this concept or idea that Islam was spread by the sword. Now, this idea, according to many, is true. And at the same time, according to many, it's false. And the problem I have with this is that in life, there are very few things that when it's looked at from a historical perspective, people actually say these are the actual facts. But for whatever reason, facts have been omitted from this concept of Islam being spread by the sword.
Yeah.
There's no facts here. It's just whatever you think. You know what I mean? And I kind of think that's kind of annoying because it is very well documented what actually took place. So it's not up to interpretation per se. You could see it amongst civilization, what actually took place. But without getting too much into the details, I thought what a lovely conversation it would be for Tarek and Mujir to talk about the fallacy of Islam being spread by the sword.
Well, in fairness, I think, first of all, that's a great question, a very important one, very topical, because even going beyond our comment section, it's just broadly one of those questions that everybody wants to talk about now. I would say in fairness, the question of whether it was spread by the sword is really having to do with what you define as spreading Islam. So it really bleeds into a couple of different questions. One is, was Islam the religion spread by coercion insofar as early Muslims put other people to the sword and said, convert or die? I'm assuming when most people are saying Islam as a faith was spread by the sword, they are asking that question. So we're going to answer that question. Being fair to the idea that there's no question early on, Islam was very imperial in its mindset. But I also want to caution people to distinguish between imperialism, which I know in modern day speak, we tend to think of as a negative thing, but in the medieval period, there was some room for someone to be a positive imperialist or benevolent. I want to distinguish that idea from colonialism. So imperialism is, of course, you want to be expansionist. You want to expand into as many territories as you can, bring them within your fold. But what you do with those extra territories is really up to you. So you can be an imperialist and want to bring the entire world under your domain, but do it because you want to spread justice. Do it because you want to unify people. Do it because you want to sound really naive, make the world a better place. So the classic example of benevolent imperialism is Cyrus the Great. Even to a certain extent, Alexander, when he conquered people, he didn't conquer them as an outsider trying to defecate all over their traditions and all their rights. He's actually trying to stabilize, and it shows in what he does when he gets there. To the point where, in Alexander's case, to his infinite credit, a lot of his Macedonian generals are giving him flack because they're saying, you executed the Greek people that were rebelling against you or that turned against us, but you're letting these people, these localers, go unharmed. And to him, the idea was different. When you colonize people or when you imperialize them, how you treat them is a little more sensitive than how you're treating deceit and treachery within your own ranks. So that's the concept of imperialism. There's a subset within imperialists where they want to colonize people. So now this is characterized as ruling from outside. You have no intention to be ruling from within or accretively advancing the interests of the local land or the people. You're typically trying to, via settlement, effect population control and change the demographics. And there's usually some strong element, depending on where you fall within the spectrum, of mercantilism and trying to exploit the local population. So you think of the British. They always ruled from afar over India. They just wanted to suck the resources dry because, as the history books will show, when the British showed up in India, it had the biggest GDP in the world. This is a fact. It's nowhere near that anymore.
Yeah, right.
Or it certainly wasn't at the tail end of the British Raj. They're trying to rule from afar. They're using racial hierarchies to divide and conquer. That is classic bedrock colonialism. So there's really two questions. Was Islam imperial or colonial? I can't speak for every single kingdom that called themselves Muslim, but if I focus on the Umayyads, the Abbasids, Uthmanis, and the Mamlukis, all these mainstream, call them the hegemonic powers of medieval Islam, they were definitely imperial, not colonial. They actually tried integrating and a lot of times borrowing from the cultures of the places that they took over. And in fact, when the Muslims conquered India under Muhammad bin Qasim at the time of Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik, for the longest time, the Muslims may have been a ruling class, including under the Mughals 1,000 years later, but they started to adopt a lot of the local practices, which later Salafis came to see as being heretical, including Aurangzeb, one of the great Mughal kings, who was he's a predecessor to modern Salafis in some ways, and he didn't like the extreme levels to which the Tasawwuf had reached in India. So this is a whole nother tangent that we can go down. But I would say that definitely, I want to make clear that in answering the question as to whether Islam was spread by the sword and me saying no, I'm in no shape or form not acknowledging that Islam was imperial. It definitely wanted to expand, but because I believe that the goodness of Islam, whether you call that naive or convenient, is up to you, whether you believe it or not. But I'm saying based on the case study and the results, I think it's fair to say it was more imperial on the benevolent side. Of course, not all kings were benevolent. You had some wiggle room within them, but it definitely was more imperial on the better side of things. Now, the next question, was it spread by the sword? Were people forced to convert to Islam? Let's start with the scripture. Anybody who says, oh yeah, well, you can tell me what you want to tell me, but I know what your sources say. After one of the most pivotal and pronounced ayahs of the Holy Qur'an, which is called the Ayatul Kursi, the verse relating to God's throne and His majesty, about how He has power over everything and domain, and everything is His, ma fis samawati wal ard. What does the next ayah say? La ikraha fid din, qad tabayyana ar-rushdu min al-ghayy. There is no compulsion in religion. You cannot force somebody to convert to Islam. Hidayah, divine guidance, finding righteousness, finding the light, is entirely up to the human, as between them and the divine, as between them and God. There is no compulsion in religion. This is a fundamental asasi principle in the Qur'an that the early ulama, and we spent an entire episode talking about the mihna and the sharia and how the ulama ensured that post-mihna, the khalifs and the amirs and the sultans were governing by sharia law or risk being displaced and delegitimized. And in most cases, that meant a coup d'etat or a rebellion or something by which the non-conforming khalif was out of a job. The sharia was usually what it all ended up coming back to. In the early Umayyad period, not only was it always against the Qur'an for somebody to convert, the entire Umayyad period in all of Bilad al-Sham, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and even Iraq, and of course Syria, Egypt, not all of which is part of Bilad al-Sham, but this core area of Middle Earth, as I call it, which is the center of Islamic civilization even to this day. Do you know that under the entire Umayyad period, about 85 to 90% were Christian?
Yeah.
So for 100 years, they're forcing people to convert. They're doing a horrible job at it because nobody's coming over.
Yeah, that's right. And I think people will need to hear that number because it speaks directly to
and read Orientalists, read Patricia Crone. You're going to have even medieval scholars, John of Damascus, who died in the 9th century, 9th century, Theophane the Confessor. These are people that are contemporary to this time. They're all speaking about the world assumptively as though it's a Christian world. Yeah, we've got these Umayyad guys rolling over, but it's a Christian world. And I'll take it a step further. The Umayyads, I've made no secrets of the fact that I don't think that they were the Khulafa al-Rashidun and that they were quite devious on so many levels, not including the great Umar bin Abdul Aziz, and Amir Muawiyah is a Sahabi, so we'll give him a pass. The vast majority of them were Qurayshi people that were dialing back the Jahiliyyah, and that is to say, they're focused on maximizing revenue from taxation in a way that allows them to spend it on themselves, to spend it on building armies, and of course palaces and all the nice things that Qurayshi Umayyads like to have in their lives. Muslims in society under Sharia law, they pay zakat. 2.5% of your dormant wealth goes to zakat. Any property that you own, there's the ushur tax, which is basically zakat on your property income. All of the revenue that comes from those sources, although the Khalif has to collect them, and by all accounts the Umayyads continued to collect them, they have no discretion over what happens to them. All that money has to go towards prescribed recipients, the poor, social programs, blah, blah. It's in the Qur'an, it's in the fiqh and the Sharia, it's well settled.
Yeah, and that's very important for people to understand that the term zakat is money that has an actual purpose. It's not like it goes into the government's bank account. That's right. It's literally set aside for the poor.
Exactly. But jizya is money over which the government, it goes to the state and over which government has full discretion on how to spend it. So when you're an Umayyad and 80-90% of your population is paying a tax that comes right into your pockets, and the other side, the people that become Muslim, you can't do anything with their money, you have zero incentive to convert people. And one of the gripes that the Abbasids ride to power on against the Umayyads is that the Umayyads don't even recognize people becoming Muslim because they're like, no. We're going to keep collecting jizya from you. We don't accept your Islam.
Yeah.
Right. It was to that level. They actually didn't want you to convert to Islam. And ulama later in the early Abbasi period cited that as one of the great elements of dhulm that the Umayyads would effect upon people. So not only did you not have any incentive, the facts on the ground were that they were not doing that. So it's not that a non-Muslim versus a Muslim is paying way more tax. Oh, look at the jizya tax you imposed on people. It's what they could do with the tax that was driving it, because we were paying tax on the Muslim side, if not more. If you're a wealthy Muslim, you're paying more tax, and you still have to serve in the military. There's so many other things that you have to abide by. But under the jizya system, which is a constitutionally protected minority status, which did not exist in the medieval period anywhere else, where minorities could come live on lands that were not theirs, didn't allow the local rulers it gave them full discretion on what they could do with that money. So not only did they have no incentive to spread Islam by the sword or force people to convert, and B, Umayyads weren't even that religious anyway, so they didn't care what you were, right? They just wanted to make more money to build their palaces and do all that. They had every incentive to keep you as a non-Muslim, so they're not going to spread it by the sword. And the facts remain, until the 9th century, which, according to reports, up until the 9th century, the majority of people in all these Muslim lands were Christian. It wasn't until the 10th century that you started seeing the Muslims break even and hit 49-50%. And it wasn't until the 12th, 13th century, in the case of Egypt, for example, but all these other countries, generally it's the 12th or the 13th century, where Islam became the overwhelming majority. So for 500 years, 600 years, we're trying to force people to convert. We're obviously not doing our job.
Major failure. Major failure. And I think that's important to drive the point.
One point. The Umayyads depended upon jizya for their fiscal budget and operation. So they actually cannot, if they force everyone to convert, they lose their entire revenue base.
Yeah.
So they have no reason to force you to convert.
Yeah. And
that's element of Sharia. So even the Abbasids, when they come in, they're still okay with building palaces with the money that the non-Muslims give them versus having to collect zakat.
That's right. And I think it's always important to distinguish, because I think a lot of people, they want to come up with, because it was an expansionist society, right? There was an element of that they negate the religious part of it. Like people have to really focus on the separation between, expanding your territories and then trying to kill everyone that doesn't become a Muslim. I think that needs to be driven home, that point. You know what I mean?
For sure. And to cover my supposed naivete, there's well-documented instances of patriarchs within the Christian church or other minorities, Jews, writing to Abbasid caliphs, thanking them for their protection of their people. In many cases, the Muslims were welcomed because, again, their Sharia constitutionally enshrined the protection of these minorities. So these minorities knew when the Muslims take you over, it's not going to be all musk and roses, but at least you have a constitutional protection. When we have an administration that is hateful towards Muslims, we still know that the Constitution and the courts will protect us. We might not be happy. We might not say, oh, this is awesome, but at least you know you've got the rule of law on your side as a Muslim.
And I think a really great example, to be honest, is that you have this Muslim imperial army that goes and conquers land, and it goes to the leaders and says, become Muslim, be part of our empire, yay or nay.
Mm-hmm.
And battles may happen here or there, and then eventually whatever settles is what settles. Now, if you compare that system where you have all these Christians, because I'm going to specifically go to this, you have all these Christians living in Egypt, all these Christians living in Syria for hundreds of years, they are safe. It's very important. You are safe. You have your churches. You can go to church on Sunday. You hear the church bells. Everything's beautiful. Fast forward to when you go to Spain, right? And then all of a sudden the Muslims are the bad guys. Like, we want to get rid of these Muslims because now they have a change in leadership. The Muslim empire becomes weak and Spain goes back. And what happens to the Muslims? What happens to the Jews? All driven out, wiped out. Until today, there's still holidays where they like burn hay or something, symbolizing, the Muslims of Jews of the time. So
who took them in? It was the Sharia-toting
That's right.
Ottomans that brought in the Jews and the Muslims that were exiled and being persecuted in Spain.
That's right. And I think it's so important because people take it for granted. People don't know their history. People don't know that if you're a minority, and we said this in a previous episode, that if you were a minority in a country and for whatever reason the king decides he doesn't like you anymore, you're basically dead.
And this is where we have to plug and remind people to go back and watch that Abbasi Mehna episode where it talks about how Islam really pioneered in the medieval period the idea of a constitutional monarchy where the Sharia constitutionally protected certain things that the caliphs could not do away with. And in fact, their legitimacy to rule was predicated upon the extent to which they implemented the Sharia. So you're judged entirely based on whether you're following the Sharia or not. And who's the arbiter of that is the Ulama. So you had this checks and balances, the likes of which we see today in the judicial system versus the executive system, where you can go into court and question, challenge the excesses of the executive. You could actually do that. And that happened to Sultan Mehmed the Great. It happened to Bayezid under the Ottomans. It happened to the Mamluk Baruquh when he couldn't get a fatwa to legitimize his rule because he had usurped power unjustly. There are so many examples of this, of where the ulama and the qadis offset executive excesses. That is a fact that you will not learn about in your Western textbooks. And the narrative is always that, hey, you guys have always just been an absolute monarchy, because they're looking at our history through a Eurocentric lens. And they don't understand that you have this ex officio sui generis category of people, the ulama, that operating outside the apparatus of state absolutely checked the executive authority within the state. And again, this is written by Dr. Noah Feldman and many, many Western scholars who recognize and appreciate the uniqueness of that time.
So to wrap it up for everybody watching, the question, was Islam spread by the sword?
Absolutely not. The facts do not bear it out. Don't take it from me as a Muslim. The facts don't bear it out. Either we were not doing it or we were just horrible at doing it. It took us 5 centuries to do it.
Yeah. So I would encourage everyone to go and do your own research to see this for yourself, because this is a very contested, hot button subject, because this is constantly being paraded around as some sort of...
But now that you've heard me say what I said, it's all fake news. I will say that.
You know what? And we'll end with that. Mujir calling it out as fake news. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time on the Sands of Time podcast.